How's it going, everybody? So, with all the drama going on the OGL and all that stuff, I kind of thought I'd make a video about that, but I kind of made something before talking about what Wizards of the Coast could do to screw it up, and they did one of the things I said to screw it up. Everybody's talking about it, making videos about it. I don't really have much to add in that regard, but with all the drama around Wizards of the Coast and all the OGL license and certainly around 5e and third party material content for 5e, a lot of people are starting to take another look at Pathfinder, right? Which is actually the system that I generally prefer. So I thought I'd do a little comparison. If you're out there kind of wondering if you want to play Pathfinder, if it's worth playing, if it's worth transitioning to, this might help you out, right? So this is a little video about kind of Pathfinder versus 5e. I don't know what 6e is going to be yet, so we'll just talk about these two, kind of just a very loose comparison of the tools, right? Comparing the two, like Pathfinder, first of all, it's not Wizards of the Coast, right? Which is probably the big reason people are looking at it right now, is that it ain't Wizards of the Coast, and anything that's not Wizards of the Coast is now okay. They're putting out the orc license or whatever. We'll see where that goes. But for now, it's not Wizards of the Coast. So if you want to give your money to a company that isn't Wizards of the Coast that makes good products, Paizo is a good option, right? Pathfinder. Now, when you're playing Pathfinder, one of the things that people really like about Pathfinder is actually the character creation process, right? It's a little bit crunchy. Actually, it's pretty crunchy. It's very crunchy, but it's a lot of fun just in the options that they give you. There's a lot of very great little customizing aspects. It's very well thought out. It gives you a lot of flavor, a lot of options. Races are handled as ancestries, right? And then you've got a series of ancestries, dwarf, elf, I think goblin, gnome, halfling, human, and then it gives you some rules for mixing half human, half whatever. And so they treat them as ancestries, and then the ancestries get their own, like, you get ancestry feats, you get all this stuff, right? So what goes into like making your character has a lot more decisions to be made than 5e D&D, right? And it's actually pretty fun. It lets you like really have a lot of fun with character creation as far as backgrounds are in there. So it's pretty fun, right? And it's if you're not into that, if you want to just create a character like that, a little tougher to do in Pathfinder, right? You do have to spend more time creating characters in Pathfinder. Another good thing about Pathfinder is the action economy system that they have for Pathfinder 2e. This, in the simplest terms, there's videos on it if you want to watch. Maybe I'll make one, but in simplest terms, you basically have a block of 3 actions that you can do whatever you want. You can mix and match, right? And you can attack 3 times, with some penalties. You can move, attack, do whatever. And what's fun about this system is that it lets you sort of use that little system to tweak it to do other things. For example, spellcasting. Spells will have a little thing that says cast and then like little action symbols. And spells, depending on what they are, can cost 1, 2, or even 3 actions, right? So you can tweak that system. So some spells say they only cost 1 action or maybe 2 actions. Pushing it to a 3rd action, dumping that action into the spell increases the power of the spell. Like there's a monk spell called I think it's Key Blast or something, and you can if you use 1 action on it, it does X amount of damage. It's like a cone. It's like a little Kamehameha from Goku, right? And the more oomph you put into it, you put all 3 actions, it turns into a cone that does more damage and knocks people down, right? It's kind of fun. So that action economy system they have is actually really good for Pathfinder. I highly recommend checking it out, even if you just wanted to rip it off and dump it into your own whatever game. The other aspect, there's an interesting spell. So some things are just different, and I wouldn't call them better necessarily, right? And they're very good at breaking down spells. In Pathfinder, there's a lot of class stuff. Like the content in Pathfinder is always going to have more flavor than D&D 5e, right? But a lot of things are just a little different and not necessarily what I think would be better. They're just different. Like sometimes you can just overlap them and or combine them, right? Which may be another video. But one thing for sure from Pathfinder, from Paizo generally, is the books, right? They have much better books. Like if you look at this book, right? Not talking about artwork necessarily, but just opening up the book, it's huge, has a lot more content. And my favorite thing that they do that makes it worth buying, right, is this little side guide, right, where you can find your way over to what you need to be, right? And so you can flip through these books real easy. Like, you want to look at equipment, that says equipment right over here, and you just sort of flip into that little thing is outline, boom, now you're in equipment, right? Makes it easy to flip through the book, and it's much easier to find things, despite the fact that this book is like 3 to 4 times the size of a 5e book. It's much easier to find stuff in it somehow. I don't know what to tell you about that, but it just kind of is. And it's one of the advantages why I really like actually giving Paizo money, because you get a product from them that isn't this bullshit, right? BS. I guess you can't curse on YouTube, but it's like, what is this, man? Like nothing's labeled, nothing's. Anyways, you have nicer books in Pathfinder. So if you're buying a physical product, I care about that thing. I want it to be well organized and accessible and worth buying, as opposed to looking it up on my phone. It's faster to look stuff up on your phone for 5e than it is to look through the book. Now, so moving on to 5e, what are some advantages of 5e? These are just sort of comparative things. One thing I do like a lot about 5e, and I kind of had to come around to it, but the whole advantage disadvantage system, where everything just kind of boils down to, do you have advantage or disadvantage? Roll 2 d20s, keep the biggest one, keep the lowest one, right? Very simple mechanic, and I like it. It just works for everything. It's like, well, you have advantage, and then you do that. And I think mathematically it comes out to about like a plus 3.5 most of the time. I forgot what the statistics are on it. So it's fairly reasonable, right? And it's just that you can use it for everything. One of the things that does get crunchy about Pathfinder is that they have modifiers for everything. You don't have to remember that you don't have to use all those things, just because the book says you do. It's the rule. You don't have to do it, right? So you can always just do advantage and disadvantage in Pathfinder as well, right? But it's something good about 5e. Generally speaking, talking about rules, 5e is easier on DMs, right? Because the rules are generally pretty simple. There's some things that are stupid, but generally speaking, it's a smaller book because there's sort of less rules and less things to look up. And that makes for an easier experience, particularly for newer DMs, right? Pathfinder DMing, it's not hard. It does require you to read a little bit more, and there's more things you gotta sort of deal with if you want to use all the rules that they give you. Again, all these things are optional, and they just give you a lot of stuff to think about, right? So if you're a new DM, it can be overwhelming at first, right? With all these categories and stuff like that, like the critical role, stuff for a Pathfinder. A lot of people really like the fact that they have critical success and critical failure, and then like just normal failure and normal success, and then you have critical success. Like on spells, they'll do more damage if you get a critical fail when they hit you, right? Stuff like that. So there's a lot more rules in Pathfinder. 5e makes things a lot easier, right, for DMs, right? So that's an advantage, I think, to 5e. It's more accessible to entry-level dungeon masters. The other thing, specifically that I really liked about 5th edition, there's probably other things, but the way they do spells for wizards particularly is much better in 5th edition, right? Now you can port that change over again to Pathfinder really easily. This is basically allowing wizards to use their spell slots. You don't have to use your spell slots, like bullets from a chamber, like for a gun. Like if you memorize, you used to in Pathfinder and in other, wizard books like Wizards of the Coast, D&D forever, is you're a wizard, you pick, let's say you pick 3 second level spells, and you pick, whatever you hold person or whatever. If you pick 2 and then 1 of something else, right? You only have those 2 and 1 of something else, which whereas in 5th edition, you could use all 3. As long as you had that spell memorized for that slot, you can dump that in there, right? And you can dump lower level spells in the higher slots. You can do that in Pathfinder as well, but that whole system of not being stuck with whatever spells you picked, that you can't use at all and you can't dump them into something else, like that was a great change to 5th edition, right? It's one of those things that's really worth doing, or really in 5th edition's favor, we'll say. And generally speaking, there's other little mechanics in 5th edition that are worth keeping, right? I don't know if they're better, but depending on who you are, what you like, right? But for me, wizard spellcasting was better. Advantage, disadvantage is a good mechanic. Saving throws, it's just a different way to do it. A lot of that stuff is just a different way to do it, not really better or worse. The system still works. Generally speaking, to sort of sum up, is that 5th edition has simpler rules most of the time, right? It's more accessible for dungeon masters, I think, and maybe even for players. Now, the other side of that for Pathfinder is that there are more mechanics to draw from, right? Character creation is more involved. It's more fun, I think. So, frankly, I always preferred, I have preferred Pathfinder since Pathfinder came out, and I still prefer Pathfinder. But 5th edition is not a bad system. I don't dislike 5th edition. And for those that are interested, definitely take a gander at Pathfinder. It's a lot of fun, and it's got said you don't have to use. Maybe I'll make a video about it, like all the ways you can Frankenstein 5th edition and Pathfinder into one thing, right? That you can use, but it's very simple to do that, right? There's not a lot of areas where it just breaks. Anything breaks, right? You can port in the wizard rules from 5th edition into Pathfinder with no problem. You can add disadvantage and advantage into Pathfinder, no problem, right? Rules that you think are too crunchy, you just dump them, right? Not a big deal. So things to think about. Pathfinder is definitely worth a go. Mostly people are going to Pathfinder probably because they're mad at Dungeons and Dragons, right? Mad at Wizards of the Coast, which is kind of the reason they went to Pathfinder back in 4th edition. We're here again, right? Worth checking out. Definitely check it out, and let's see what news the whole OGL controversy brings. Like, people are super big mad. Let's see what happens. All right, take it easy.